Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's Connecting Conversation Discussion Board. We're joined today with Kelly, who works at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. So thanks for hopping on, Kelly.
Of course, thanks for having me.
So to get us started, can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you ended up at the MFA and about how long you've been there, that kind of thing?
Yes, so starting from the beginning, I have an undergraduate degree in art history and I have a master's degree in arts administration. That's not at all the trajectory anyone needs to take. It's just the one I chose for myself. I went to grad school in Boston, so that's how I ended up here. And when I was in grad school, I interned with the MFA in corporate relations.
Mhm.
And that is about, we have a corporate membership program at the MFA and corporate sponsorship. So that's helping to connect companies and their employees to the museum. And it's also a way to get people to, or get companies to sponsor exhibitions to help them come to fruition. Um, Through that internship, I kept those connections, and a couple years later, after I had graduated, I worked in the field for about a year. I asked my former supervisor if she would like to get lunch. We got lunch, and afterwards, she sent me two different job applications for the Museum of Fine Arts. And I applied, and that's how I ended up in this position. It actually wasn't a position I saw myself in originally. I didn't have um, a ton of background in annual programs, and I'll talk a little bit more about what annual programs is in a second, but um, I knew that my skills were transferable, and I'm absolutely thrilled in the position I'm in. So I'm happy I ended up here, and I've been here for almost a year now.
Awesome, thank you. So we are actually learning a bit about museums and their structures in the readings for the same week that this posts, which makes it really timely. So can you talk a little bit about why the museum is a nonprofit and why it chooses to operate that way to the best of your knowledge?
Sure. To the best of my knowledge,
Mhm.
so the museum is a 501(c)(3) public charity, and it operates that way because, at least in the case of the MFA, it doesn't and almost never has operated on um, funding outside of public. We don't really get state funding, we don't get anything. So it makes sense for the structure of the museum to be based on public donation and for it to exist for the people by the people. You don't have stakeholders when you're a nonprofit, and you can choose to, at least in the best circumstance, reflect the communities that you're serving.
Yeah.
So, and it is about the preservation of the art, the education, and connecting the community with the art. And that's something you can do without, I don't, do you guys talk about stakeholders and influence in your
Yeah,
class?
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. That I think that's kind of the focus here. And honestly, I didn't really realize that museums were nonprofit. I guess I just never thought about it.
Yeah.
It makes sense if you're operating within a specific community. It makes sense that you serve that community as they wish to be served, and without having to report to other people.
Right.
You have that freedom, and it really makes sense when you think about, all the Smithsonian's in DC are free, and so obviously they're a public entity. So,
Mhm.
um, yeah, it's just
That's
one of
my
those things you
dream
don't
for
really
all
think
museums to
about.
be free.
I agree. I agree. Okay, so then you likely have like a board of directors kind of
Mhm.
hierarchy in there. Um,
Mhm.
so tell us a little bit about what you specifically do at the museum.
Sure. So I am the program manager for the Museum Council, which lives in annual programs. And annual programs, the budget, the revenue we make actually makes up about 10% of the budget for the MFA, which doesn't sound like a lot, but in the context of the MFA, it truly is. And that's kind of the backbone of what helped us survive during the pandemic, because annual programs funds is what's called unrestricted funds. I'm sure you guys have talked about that as well, but it is the funding that can pay for a new HVAC system. It pays for salaries. It can go to community programs you want, versus a large portion of our endowment fund is restricted money.
Mhm.
So, for instance, there is a fair amount of money set aside in our endowment that's restricted to the collection or the obtaining of ancient Egyptian art, which is illegal now. So it's unusable, and there's a whole
Yeah.
legal, steps you have to take in order to alter where those funds are allocated, but that's kind of an example of why annual programs is so important and significant. So in the Museum Council, my job is the cultivation of our next generation of philanthropists. So the Museum Council is for people ages 21 to 49 at the upper end, and the entry level is at 300 a year for our 21 to 26-year-old, and it goes all the way up to 3,000. The idea being it's for two people as well. The idea being to get people to initiate their relationship with their museum in a deeper way. And as they grow and progress through those levels, it becomes more and more philanthropic. Typically, philanthropy exists for philanthropic families. And in order to get new voices in the room, which Boston is filled with diversity and incredible communities, we feel that the Museum Council is a way to actually start to get those voices in the room. As I said earlier, the reason why we're a nonprofit is so that you can represent the community. But still, historically, a lot of times the people on the board of advisors, the board of trustees, the people who hold a lot of the wealth, especially in New England, are a pretty similar community.
Kelly, it's okay.
It's a bunch of rich white people that came on the Mayflower, basically. So the reason the Museum Council exists is to try to diversify those voices so we can truly be representative of the communities we serve.
Yeah. So what kind of benefits, I guess, do they get? What do you offer to them for that payment at whatever level they pay?
Sure. So it's about we have about 215 households total, and all of those households are invited to an event almost once a month at the museum. And it's a semi-private, intimate event where either it's just the Museum Council invited, or it's the Museum Council and the patron program, which is our higher level of elevated membership. And they get to have an intimate experience with the curators, behind the scenes looks, and a dinner and drinks. So it is a great opportunity, especially at those younger levels, to network, to find community. It's hard to make friends in your 20s when you're done with school. So we have that opportunity. But it is about kind of showing a little bit behind the curtain for these people, so they can start to develop that relationship.
And where do you find these people?
Sure. So a lot of it is through our members bringing people. We let people bring prospects occasionally to the museum. I started going to networking events at the Chamber of Commerce, was the first one I did this year, for young professionals. I'm going to start reaching out to alumni associations this year, some social media sponsorship, various avenues to try and really get that, let's say, 21 to 35-year-old block, and then age up with them as they go.
Well, and one of the things that I think we all kind of talk about is, while these things are good to do for yourself, for your professional development, especially where you're young, carving those things into your budget is hard to do when you have your cost of living and your cost of food and your student loans and all those things. So can you tell me a little bit about how you really advertise or pitch this to people? Because asking people for money is hard, right? So what are some of the ways that you go about making it a little more approachable and friendly?
Sure. I mean, the easiest way I can describe it to, or to make it more palatable to the 20 to 30 somethings, even the 30 to 40 somethings, is think about going out 10 times in Boston. Do you think you're spending more than $150?
Yeah.
So, and it is, so this is a conversation we're currently having in the museum because originally it seems when people enter the Museum Council, it is almost strictly a cost to benefit direct relationship. And then when they get to the higher level, it becoming more about the philanthropy side of things. And that's fine. That is how the Museum Council works. So yes, when you're 21 to 26, it's that $300 level. And you get with that a private and exclusive experience at the museum. You get endless drinks and food.
That'll do
it. Yeah. So once you get to have those conversations, it kind of pays for itself, but it's not something we can actually, it's not the cleanest thing or the cutest thing to market. So I'm trying different models of, finding your community with like-minded individuals and young leaders. And also I am trying now, because people can pay it on a monthly basis as well, instead of straight out. So I know that this age group is pretty used to the monthly model based on subscription services we're also used to. So breaking that out in a monthly payment versus,
Mhm.
having it be a whole $300 at once seems like a lot, but over the course of 12
Yeah.
months is not too bad.
Well, and I think too, the opportunity to know that there will be like-minded people that are interested in the things you're
Mhm.
interested in at the place that you're going every time is a
Yes.
lot more interesting than, I'm gonna go to this bar with my friends, we'll see what the scene is. I'm gonna drop
Right.
$100 anyway, and I might not meet anybody that I want to talk to
Right.
there.
Exactly. I mean, I don't want to take credit for people's relationships at the museum, but people have also met, gotten married, got engaged through the museum council. So it is successful in that model of people coming together, getting to know each other, having similar interests. And it's not everyone who comes from an art background. We have a lot of gallery people, but we also have a fair amount of tech people.
Mhm.
I have a group called the Steering Committee, and they are my group of volunteers from the Museum Council that I meet with 4 times a year to discuss kind of the trajectory of the Museum Council. And I would say out of 15, 4 of those are tech people who, and when we've asked them their reasoning for joining, and it's that they just wanted some like variety of experience in their lives. They're surrounded by tech people and they wanted to, indulge in the arts a little. So it's an interesting group.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah.
So that kind of covers a lot of like the external facing parts of
Mhm.
your position. Internally, do you or are you able to talk a little bit to how decisions are made on how many of these memberships you need to find? Like, what are the
Mhm.
directives coming to you, and is it based on needs for the museum or just bumping up numbers for the previous year? What does that look like on an internal conversation?
Yeah, so I can say I have a pretty direct understanding of what we would like my numbers to be. And the revenue goal for the year is based on that as well. So we increase about 5% every year. And the reason being during the pandemic, which I hate to talk about, but it's relevant in all of our workspaces and how it affected us. But during the pandemic, the museum council was gutted. This age group didn't really want to do online
Yeah.
virtual lectures or anything. They were kind of burnt out with it all. So the membership tanked. I think we lost over 30% of our membership
Wow.
in that time. So we're at 215 now. I think at our highest, we were around 380 something. So it is truly about rebuilding. And I think any progress to that is quite positive. Like I said, I've only been here for a year. When I first started, I think we were at 180.
Wow.
So we're getting there. Yeah. And my idea, I mean, it has to be exponential at some point. It feels like you're inching at first, and then after a while, word of mouth becomes greater and greater, and then it kind of is self-sustaining. But it is truly rebuilding. We also had a fair amount of those people who were with us pre-pandemic have now aged out or decided to move into the patron program,
Hmm.
which is exactly what the program is for. The museum looks at it as an investment. Um,
Right.
and the patron program is where we want them to go and live with the museum for the rest of their days, as long as they
Yeah.
want to.
I would imagine at that $300 membership level with all of your offering, you're lucky if
Mhm.
you break even in the events that you run,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Are you operating at a loss?
I think, yeah, pretty much, or at least breaking even. So the $3,000 level membership definitely helps us out. I think if I can look at the exact numbers, our revenue was about 185 last year. I think our goal is 225 this year.
Mhm.
So significant.
Yeah.
I'm working on that. Um, and we probably our inside events, that budget line is about that much. So it truly is like a break even experience. So when you actually look at the memberships, because tax deductibility is a part you factor in, that
Mhm.
associate level and even the general member level at $600 is pretty much not tax deductible.
Yeah, interesting. And I
Yeah.
think that that's an important thing for folks to know when they're thinking of leading their nonprofits. Everything that you do and all the events you run are not necessarily to turn a profit or to bring in
No.
money. It's to develop relationships so that
Right.
later you can do those things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, we have people who were on the museum council who are now on the board of advisors for the museum, people who are like at the benefactor level, people who are giving, anywhere up to 20,000 or more,
Yeah.
it all depends on the individual, but it is seems to be a successful model.
Yeah. Well, and I think that that's a good point too, in a lot of, the rural nonprofits where I am, it is hard to
Mhm.
find board members. It is hard to find volunteers. There's just not really
Yes.
people with those qualifications and willingness. But cultivating relationships with folks, particularly when you're targeting different groups, gives you a pool to pull from later,
Yeah.
that you otherwise you wouldn't know them.
Hmm.
So yeah, you might be losing money on one end, but on the other end, you're gaining voices, you're gaining
Yeah.
direction, you're basically getting a free strategic plan out of these people
Yeah.
because they're
It's the
telling you,
non-tangibles, right?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
they're telling you exactly what they want to keep coming, and then you don't
Mhm.
have to try to figure that out yourself.
Yeah, I mean, so in my last, I think the end of November was my last steering committee meeting,
Mhm.
and we were, very honest and open with them and talking about the vision for the museum of the museum council, and because they wanted to see our financials, they wanted to understand it better. When we say no to certain things, or it's not possible, or it doesn't actually raise any money, or to have those conversations because a lot of it is audience development, but at some point you have to say, we don't have that within the budget,
Yeah.
you know? And we found out a few of our members, even our higher level ones, don't consider the museum council part of their philanthropy.
Hmm.
So it becomes a messaging problem there. So I've kind of turned my tone with the museum council to being, as I said earlier, at the associate, which is a 300, and then the $600 member level, like being exactly benefit
Mhm.
cost. It makes sense. It's equal. But then introducing when I'm having conversations with people about why should I become a museum council fellow, which is when it becomes a 1,200 and then 3,000, to
Mhm.
talk about this is when you start thinking philanthropically that you are making the decision to increase your relationship with the museum and support us in a way that is needed in our annual operating support and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So just being more open, I think a lot of times, and I don't know concretely about this, but I feel like people have this facade, like they want to keep it kind of smoky around like what actually goes on behind closed doors. But I find that if you talk to these people about what the reality of things are, it's a very easy conversation to have. People understand.
Yeah, I agree. I usually tell even just my staff here, like if I'm doing something in secret, then I'm not doing the right thing. I should
Right,
be able
right.
to tell you where the money is going, what it looks like,
Yes.
even as down to like if I'm not in my office, where am I? Look at my calendar. That transparency is really helpful,
Hmm.
and helps people feel one, respected, and two,
Hmm.
valued for their time and energy that they're putting in.
Absolutely.
Just interesting. So can you in our probably our last like 5 or so minutes here tell me, in your office, do you do like mailings, phone calls? Are you waiting for
Mhm.
people to come in? What does your communication plan look like?
Yeah, I love that. So, I could say to take you through our renewal process. That's where a lot of my stuff goes. We do have an officer, an annual programs officer,
Mm.
and she has those more one-on-one coffees with people to talk about their relationship and everything. So, in my program manager part of it, I deal a lot with renewals and making sure that people's relationship stays intact and that side of things. So in renewals, luckily with the museum council, I get to do a lot of it through email. There's
Yeah.
almost no point in direct mail with this age group. Our addresses are changing constantly,
Mhm.
and I check my mail like twice a month. So
Fair
I'm
enough.
sure my mailman loves that,
Yeah,
but
I bet.
yeah. So I get to do a lot from email, and our strategy from that is the first two actually come from our CDO from the museum council email. So
Mhm.
I'm sending them, but it's their letter from the museum council email. It's very fancy, super official. And then for the last two, we send 4 through the cycle. So I have them labeled as next month, this month, and last ditch.
Hmm. Yeah, perfect.
And yeah, so for the last 2, they come from my work email
Mhm.
and with my signature and my communication. And I think because the museum council, it's not a big team, it's really me and the officer. So people are used to me. They see my name, they understand. And the other part is that museum council members are also general members. So they're getting every communication from the museum. So they're inundated. So it's really, it seems when they get that email finally from me, like, hey, you've lapsed.
Yeah.
Can you come back in, or let's have a talk about if you don't want to continue this relationship and why.
Mhm.
And that's also language that changed this year, which helped a lot. It seems when you ask people, hey, like, what happened is, do you want to talk about it? We're open to listening.
Mhm.
People will provide it, or they'll say, oh, no, everything's fine. I forgot.
Mhm.
So that was super effective. So it is a lot of email now that we're in end of year. So there's a bit of an end of year push.
Does your fiscal year align with the calendar year?
It doesn't, but it's an
Oh, I see.
opportunity. So the fiscal year for the MFA is July
Yeah.
1st through June 30th,
Yeah.
which a
Okay.
lot are. The reason why there's an end of year push is because it's an opportunity for fundraising because of people's taxes.
Mhm.
So with the end of year push, my goal set for this month is higher than other months. And so I am going to look at our like top givers for this month, or who are up for renewal or over that 4-month span, and
Mhm.
start doing calls. Um, so I do sometimes do calls, not typically. And especially if I know the person, I know they have been to events in the past year, they have a good relationship, it's not a problem to give a call. And it's not a problem to stray from the format we have from those emails either.
Yeah.
So it would feel weird having a canned email for someone that I talk to all the time at events.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
makes sense. It's so
Yeah.
interesting. It's completely flipped here because my clientele is largely over 60, that
Mhm.
all of my communications are direct mail or phone calls because they're
Yeah.
not checking their emails. And so just be mindful. They don't even have emails, or no, if they do. And so just being mindful of, tailoring to your audience and not
Mhm.
your preference, right? Because my preference would never be to call anyone ever.
Me either.
But that's what you have to do if you've got an older population like I do. So that's interesting. Okay, so in our last few minutes here, I just want to really highlight what you said at the beginning about the importance of this existing for unrestricted funds,
Mhm.
because that's key to what I think most organizations do. I think a lot of people don't realize when they're writing grants and getting state contracts, it's usually for the services you deliver, but not for the people or things needed to deliver those services. Like we have utilities bills to pay and
Yeah.
mortgages or rent or taxes to pay. Even as a nonprofit, we still have to pay taxes. I don't know
Yep.
why. And so for that opportunity to raise funds that can really go towards anything, is crucial. Do you have any background on what some of those funds have been used for specifically at the museum? Do you get that info, or is that kind of siloed in another area?
I will say it is siloed, but we are working on that information because our steering committee, again, expressed that if they receive communication with their donations or their renewals that said,
Mhm.
you giving this much provides this, a school kit, a transportation for people, keeping the air on, keeping, the humidifiers
Yeah.
going, that kind of thing, that they're into that kind of communication to know what the direct effect is, because that is the struggle with unrestricted funds, right? It is so broad and so important that it
Mhm.
makes communicating what it does a little more difficult. It's not sexy to say air conditioning.
Right.
It's,
But it is what
versus
it
like,
is.
here's a new gallery, here's the, so
Yeah.
it's yeah, so the museum council just goes into that. The museum council goes into the same place that our MFA fund, which is our annual fund, and
Mhm.
the patron program money. It all goes into one bucket, and that gets used wherever it is needed throughout the museum. We also do have a couple special funds. So one is the Artist in Residency Program Fund, and that has funded, that is, I guess, restricted, but it's specifically for living artists. to be able to showcase art at the museum. And I found that one really special as well for representing the community that
Yeah.
exists.
That's awesome. I know I
Yeah.
asked that because I get that a lot where, especially here, folks will say like, I really want to donate to the women's veterans because that's such
Right.
a niche thing that we do.
Yep.
And I'll usually say like, I appreciate that.
Mhm.
However, the furnace blew. And we
Right,
know
right. We have more
at
pressing
headquarters.
things. Mhm.
I've got a $25,000 heating system to fix.
Yeah.
Any interest in helping towards that? And I usually find if I can tell people specifically, like, I don't need
Yes.
it for this, but here is the problem I'm having. They're happy to just help solve the problem to keep things
Yes.
going.
Absolutely. Like we talked about that transparency. It's definitely, and to have the conversation, like, I don't know if it's the case for your women vets, but to say like, that's funded,
Yeah,
we're
there's
we're
6
good
of
there.
them. We're good.
Yeah, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, yeah,
But
absolutely.
actually we're all sweating to death. Can you help?
Can you please help? Everything's in disarray at the building
Yeah.
next door.
Yeah.
Everybody talks a lot about breaking down silos, right? It's kind of a
Mhm.
problem everywhere. But once you know the importance and how it can be applied, it makes
Mhm.
it a little easier. So knowing that information
Yeah.
is helpful. Um,
Yeah, and I'll say that's something because the difference is I'll speaking to the class,
yeah.
that the MFA is massive. So we are very siloed,
Yeah.
versus I've worked at a small shop where the entire foundation was 4 people.
Yeah.
The MFA, this isn't in development, but we have 500 employees at least. It might be closer to like 800 now.
Wow.
So it is a massive institution. So there's a person for everything
Mhm.
at this museum. So those conversations like a bursted furnace, I would say would probably go to our officers.
Yeah.
And the development officers class is
Mhm.
people who have a portfolio of givers at the museum
Mhm.
who are going to, I mean, they may have already learned this for you, but they really hone in on that relationship. So they can have that conversation of, hey, I know you love giving to this every year, but this is where your funds are really needed and will have the greatest impact this year.
Yeah. People well enough to say this is where we're hurting.
Right,
It's really important.
exactly.
That Rolodex is crucial for sure. I
Yes.
have that for this organization, it's the American Legions and the
Hmm.
VFWs,
Hmm.
where I can call and say, I know you like to do like Christmas presents for the vets every year. I've got another organization covering that, but our food
Yeah,
pantry is empty. Can you just
yeah,
do a canned goods drive?
yeah.
People that
And
you
who
can
would say no to that?
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
People that you can call and honestly say, like, I know this is what you prefer, but because you guys are such good helpers,
yeah,
I thought I would ask for this instead. And it's nice to know people that you won't insult when you ask those things,
yes. Hmm.
and people that'll be on board.
Yes.
Um,
I think when I first entered this field, I was so afraid of the money talk. It seemed
mhm.
so foreign to
Awful.
me. Yeah, it's so awful. And then when you actually get into it and you have those relationships developed, and everyone said it before I entered the field, but
Mhm.
it isn't so bad. It's really the person's expecting it. They know their relationship, or they should, with
Yeah.
the institution, and it never comes out of left field.
Yeah.
Or yeah.
It's true. They know if you're calling them why you're calling. It's not
Yeah.
like, how's the weather?
Yeah, the development officer from the place that you're donating to isn't always calling to say like,
How's
"Are
the
you eating
family?
today?" Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, once you've done it a couple times, not that it gets easier, but it gets more natural. You don't worry
Yeah,
about it as much. Um,
absolutely.
well, we are just at that 30-minute mark, so I'll cut us off here. Thank you so much, Kelly.
Thank you, Stephanie. This was lovely. Happy to talk whenever.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Okay. So for the class, you've got a bunch of prompt questions. Make sure you respond to the prompt questions and at least 2 of your classmates by Sunday at 10 p.m. And I'll see you in the chat.